All right, we are at the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get going. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to MAXDAYS 2023. In this session, we are going to get you the tools to start working with focus group data in MAXQDA. My name is Joel Drevlo. I am a MAXQDA cooperation partner and certified trainer based out of Boston, Massachusetts, USA. Go Red Sox. Looks like we're having an error with the link. I think we'll get that sorted. So when we talk about focus group data, it captures such an interesting social dynamic of participants communicating in a group setting. We can observe behavior and response or agreement with others. We can see how conversation flows, the tangents that people might go off on that they might find interesting or others might not find interesting. There's a lot going on, is the point. It's exactly for this reason that having some of these tools at your disposal in terms of how you organize your data is really important, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. Just how can you set this up to enable you to view a lot of these different things and sort of to do some exploratory analysis of the data that you're working with. So again, here's a little bit of my bio. If you get the download that I think has been provided here in the handouts, my information is included there as well. It looks like the link is working now, so go ahead and download that. When we talk about today's topic, just a couple things that I want to sort of prep you on in terms of what we're going to see in this particular webinar. First, we're going to show you the tools that you need to get started. So we're going to look at the actual data import process, as that's a really important aspect of focus group data. We'll start then, once we have data in, we'll look at an overview of your data. So getting just sort of some big picture elements in terms of how many times did people speak, who was speaking to whom, sort of what was the flow of the conversation, just to kind of give you some of those elements to be able to get started. Additionally, we're going to take you through some aspects, namely through variables and some other sort of custom things, so that you can take multiple approaches as you get into this analysis. So the idea is to set you up to be able to do this work, and so that you can be flexible as you get going through it. All right. So in terms of the specific topics, we're going to start again with data import. We're going to explore some of the data. I've got some specific tools here: the overview of focus group speakers, the code line, maybe the word explorer if we can get to it. We'll talk about activation. There's some unique ways to do activation in using focus groups, because you'll see them kind of as sub documents in a way, and you'll see that when we get the actual data imported. And we'll also talk about creating and editing speaker variables, which I think is a really fun piece of this, is to add in that variable data. All right. So as we get going here, what I want to talk about first is actually the data itself. So I'm going to actually pull over a Word document here. Okay, so you should be able to see that. Essentially what this is a transcript, a focus group transcript. And when you're working with focus group data, the important thing here is to follow the specific format that MAXQDA looks for. And so what it needs is some kind of name, right? So we have moderator, then a colon, and when you get to the end of your paragraph, a line break. And so when MAXQDA sees this line break and then the presence of a second or a subsequent colon here, what that's going to do is basically signify that this is a speaker change. So we have a new speaker who's talking. So, whatever transcription service you use, or if you're, doing it old school and typing it yourself, you will need to have it in that particular format. So I am going to make one small change here as we get through this, just for demonstration purposes. Make a spelling error in here so you can see sort of what this looks like. So let's go ahead and actually import this data and see what this looks like. So when you import focus group transcripts, you want to use this specific option for focus group transcripts. So you're not going to get the auto coding unless you use that particular option. So when we import this, you'll notice there's a couple options here with timestamps and without timestamps. So if you have a video or audio recording, you can include that. You can hyperlink it essentially to your transcript. So I can actually read my transcript of the conversation and I can listen or watch. So if that's an important aspect of your method or your approach that you're taking, you can do that. Additionally, we do have some API with specific transcription services. So if you used, for example, AmberScript, you can connect via your account and you can pull in whatever transcriptions that you've created. So that can be kind of a helpful piece. I get asked a lot, what's the best type of transcription service? I don't really have a specific recommendation. They're all quite good. The only recommendation I have for you would be to pay attention to the specific language that you're going to use. Some of these function better in English or German or Spanish. So that might be a part of your search criteria if you are using data in a different language. So when we import here, my transcript today does not have transcripts. I'm just have a Word document stored on my desktop, focus group, and I'm going to go ahead and import this now. And so what happens when you import this is you get a table to start. And what this is going to allow you to do is to specify the actual sort of metadata that gets attached to the particular speakers. So note that you can resize these two if you need a little extra space. So I've got a column for my speakers, a column for my contributions, and my code colors. If I have something here I don't want, I can simply uncheck and it will not, the data will still get imported, but it will not get auto-coded with a speaker. One thing I highly recommend that you do is to change the colors. You're going to see why in a second here. So let's go ahead and change all these colors. This is going to allow you to do some fun stuff. Oop, this one needs to be, let's do this pink. And you'll also see here, I made this intentionally. I spelled Andy with a Y and Andy with an IE. It's a typo. What I can do to make this easier on myself, I can open my Dropbox. I can specify this as Andy. And so what you'll see here is 11 now, but when I import, you're going to see 12. So let's go ahead and do that. If I come over to Andy, you see I have 12 segments, which means 12 instances where Andy spoke. And so having these particular speaker changes, essentially you'll see it's just a code. But you'll note that it appears in my document system and in my code system, which is unique for a code. And it's a really cool feature in that it allows you to do some really interesting combinations as you start to activate things. So you can look for some really specific information or sort of codes that you may be interested in. Let's take a look now. So we saw the basic example. Let's take a look at the error example. And let me just show you what I've done here so you get a sense. You'll see in this highlighted section, I threw in a false positive here. So I have a line break, a name, colon, and a line break. And that's going to be, MAXQDA is going to interpret that as a new speaker. I did it again in this line, but you see the difference here is that there's no line break. This all exists in the same line. So you could still use colons. You just need to be sure that the line break doesn't happen. Typically what we would recommend in cases like that where you have false positives is just to change it to a dash or delete it or something, and it will remove those instances. I'm going to show you a trick too to identify situations when you have that problem. So let's go ahead. We'll import this one now without timestamps. So focus group error example. Let's see, I don't know what that. Oh, I put it as a transcript, not as a focus group transcript. Let's go ahead and remove these. I was wondering what was going on there. Okay, focus group transcripts without timestamps. Okay, so you can see here I have the example that gives me one coded segment where we've made a mistake, where this should not be coded. But in the other piece of text, in Fatima's line of text where there was the example in line, it does not throw an error. So you can see that it is possible to include colons as long as you don't have those line breaks. But I'm going to show you a quick way. If you happen to have lots of false positives or you have issues with this transcript, I'm going to show you a way that you can identify this and correct it in your transcript. So let's go ahead and do this. All right, so I've got my focus group error example. And so what I'm going to do, I know that this example is incorrect. So I'm going to activate my focus group, and I'm going to activate example in my focus group speakers. And so this is interesting in that you can activate in both places, right? And so when I open up my retrieve segments window, now I get that instance where the speaker code was incorrect. And so what I'm going to do is auto code this, and I'm going to call this flag for edit. We'll include this. One segment is coded, so you'll note if I come up to my transcript, I have it right here. Interestingly, note that I highlighted that in my Word document, and it actually imports that. So it gives me a yellow highlight code. So that's kind of cool if you're importing marked up text. Just a little note for you if you didn't know you could do that. All right, so I've got this coded. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to export this, export document. That's a right-click option. I'll send it out as a PDF. Or actually, there's one step first. I am going to, let's see, what color is my code here? It is, let's make this orange. Oops, that was the wrong one. Flag for edit, okay. So we're gonna turn off all these codes and we'll turn on our flag for edit. So that's the only code that I have present in my document. I'm gonna export this as a PDF, display my coded segments. I'll drop this on my desktop. Let me open that up. And now when I have this open, you'll see I have this coded. So I have my typo here now is coded. And so this just makes it easier to identify those errors. If you've got really long transcripts and you've got lots of these typos, that can be kind of nice because it just makes it a little bit easier to go back and make those edits. But for this example, we don't need this anymore. This is incorrect, and we'll go ahead and leave that. All right, so in terms of getting data in, that's really the process. We want to make sure that we use that import, those particular import options. We set things up correctly. We change our colors, and we make sure that we've got our names added correctly. So what we're going to do here is, let's see, convert. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the overview of this stuff. So when we have our focus groups, our focus group data imported, and we have these particular speakers, we can actually get kind of an overview of the conversation as a whole. So if I right-click in my focus group and I come down to this overview section in my menu, and I select the focus group speakers option. If you haven't checked these out, these are really cool overview pieces in terms of if you're doing exploratory stuff in your project. It's a nice feature. So I'm going to open up this focus group speakers, and you'll see what I have here is a table that gives me a breakdown of my different speakers, of the contributions, the percentage of contributions, words, percentage, all that good stuff. So I can kind of get a sense of, is the contribution fairly equal in terms of who's contributing, the number of words and things like that. And so I can get kind of a nice sense of the overall conversation. Another thing that I can do here is, in this case, I have the moderator contributions present, and that may not be all that interesting to me because they're just questions. It's not actual relevant text. So what I can do here is I can activate my 4 speakers. I can choose to filter. So this is a filter for only activated focus group speakers. And now, if I undo that, if you take a look at this column, for example, the percentages, you'll see that my percentages will change because I'm working with a different portion of data, right? I'm not working with the entire document. I'm only working with my actual speakers. So that's kind of a nice piece. If you're interested in doing word counts or things like that, you can kind of, you can make sure that you're only looking at relevant contributions. In terms of this piece, we're gonna come back and check this out a little bit later. We're gonna add some columns for variables in a little bit, but we're gonna pause with this for now. I'm going to show you one kind of cool visualization that you can do with focus group data, and that is the code line. So when I activate this in my document system, I can right-click this. I can come down to my visual tools, and I can generate a code line from this. And then this will actually create, if I open this up, you can see I have this sort of moving depiction here. And sort of what this is it is the sequence of the conversation. So these are paragraphs. If I open up my focus group, you can see the paragraphs listed here on the side. So these are the specific contributions. So I can actually get a sense of how the conversation is flowing. And in this one, we can get an idea that this is fairly directed from the moderator, right? The moderator seems to be starting most of these conversations. And things are flowing in a fairly similar sequence in terms of how this is happening. You can adjust some of this stuff. So I can adjust my bin width here in terms of the number of paragraphs that are included in various pieces. I always show this with visualizations that you can export this stuff over to QTT. I'm a big proponent of QTT as a workspace to keep your analysis situated. I think it's a really great tool. You can also send this out to your clipboard or to Excel, something like that. So this one gives you kind of a cool demonstration of sort of how these how the conversation flows throughout the transcript. I'm also going to show you one more here that I think is kind of cool. Let's see if I can do this from, yes, I can. So if I right click, note that you can also find the code line up here in your visual tools. The next one we're going to do is this document portrait. And so I am going to right click here and create my document portrait. Let's see. And for this one, so what this is this is similar to the code line. It's just a different representation. So the page is representative of the entire transcript, and the blocks are representative of the individual contributions. So again, the idea of setting colors is important because you wouldn't be able to see these distinctions without. But what this shows is sort of the flow of the conversation in sort of a little bit more of I guess, a density representation. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but the size of the blocks is representative of the amount of conversation. And here you can see things in sequence. If I were to change, I can change a few of these things. I can change these to circles versus squares. If I have I can put in a legend here to give me sort of an idea of who's who. There's also different ways that you can represent this. So in this case, ordered by document, meaning where it happens in the actual flow of the conversation. So who spoke first, who spoke second. You can also change this to just individual speakers. So I can get sort of a representation of who spoke how much. And so this can be kind of an interesting visualization to see. Maybe there was one particular speaker or a segment of a particular variable value that dominated the conversation. You can also order this in columns as well if you want to see this. So again, these are some exploratory tools to get a sense for some general commentary on sort of the overall feel and nature of your focus group. So we close that out, the document portrait. The next piece I'd like to look at here is actually the speaker variables. And so you can get a sense of this if I right click here. Again, if I come back to my overviews and I come to my focus group speakers, you'll see me here in this column. I don't have anything that's been generated from myself. I haven't created anything yet as the analyst. What I can do here is I can actually add variables. So you need to change your view. So right now we're in the data editor. And so if I come over to my list of variables, I can actually add custom variables. So let's go ahead and do a couple. The first one we'll add is just a simple one. We'll add an age variable, and we'll make that an integer because it is an integer. We will add another one for, let's see, level of education is always an easy one. And we'll leave that as a text variable. And we'll add another one. We'll just say number of children. These are pretty straightforward. You could have any kind of variable in here that you wanted. You know, if you've done pre-screen like survey data, things like that with your survey or with your focus group respondents, you can import that as well. If you have that collected in a spreadsheet, that's an easy one to integrate. I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then so now that I have some actual variable values in, I can come back to my data editor and you can see that I have now 3 new columns for age, level of education, and number of children. And actually, I want to go back and change number of children. Oops. I want to change this to text, and it doesn't look like it'll let me. So what I'll have to do is delete that variable, and we'll add it in again. So pay attention when you are creating your variables to make sure you set the right one. We'll put this as an integer. If I come back now, I can add, so let's just put in some dummy values. We'll just say, put all of them in the 20s. Okay. We'll put level of education. We'll say high school education, some college, bachelor's, and we'll just go ahead and stop there. Number of children, ooh, 20. That would be something. 1, no children, 2 children, 1 child. So when we have these values, what we can actually do then is we can activate our focus group speakers based off of certain criteria. We can create some sets. When we get into what I'm going to show you in a second here in the mixed methods tools, we can generate some interesting cross tabulations based off of the coding that we've done and the variable values that we have access to. So let me go ahead and show you that in a second. I did also want to explain how you can add those. So there's an option here. Let me hover over that again so you can see. It says import data. So you can actually import a spreadsheet. So again, if you've done a pre-screener and you have some survey data that you've already collected in advance, you can include that. Or if you have, you know, post data, whatever it is, you can include that in your spreadsheet. And so really all you need is these columns. If you have multiple focus groups, you'll need this because this is going to be the title of the document. And then the speaker will be what MAXQDA uses to tag the variables. So if you're doing something where if you need to keep things anonymized, that's perfectly okay. Just make sure that you have unique values for each speaker so that when you try to tie variable values to that speaker, MAXQDA won't get confused because it's looking for a key value there. So you'll need to have that. A really easy way to do this is just to export this as an Excel table and then delete these black columns here, and you'll have everything that you need. Then you can append any data that you have, and it'll match right in when you do your import. That's really the most straightforward way to do this. So let's look at some of the ways that you can actually leverage these variables now that you've got them into your actual data set. One of the easiest ways to do that, let's reset my activations here. Let's go ahead and delete these old codes that I don't need. If I were to actually activate this, I can right click in my focus group. I have the opportunity here. Actually, we'll go up here, activate documents by variables. Is there an option for speaker? Here we go, activate focus group speakers by variables. That's the one we want. What's nice about that, as opposed to using just the variables option, the variables option is going to give you everything in your entire project. And that's not going to be very helpful for us unless you know your project in and out. It's going to be much simpler, much more straightforward to use the actual activate focus group speakers by variables to use that particular option. And so then you'll have here what you can do is to specify this particular variable value. And so, for example, with if I did age, I can set this to a particular value. So I could say all individuals that are 22. It's not terribly interesting because all of our participants have different ages. But you can set some logic in here, individuals over the age of 22, you can combine things as well. So I could combine age and level of education, right? So you'll have to play around with this a little bit, because the more values that you specify, the sort of smaller your parameters get in terms of how much data you're pulling back. And I mean, that could be your goal, but just be aware of that, that the more levels you specify, the less data you're going to get returned. And so if I did that, I could activate these things. You'll see I have 2 focus group speakers. If I activate those, they should activate over here in my, well, this isn't going to help because I just have the singular, the singular piece. But if I activate focus group speakers by variables, oh, that value is empty. And this one, I have 0 here. So I don't have anything that matches this particular criteria. In this case, I have 1. So if I activate this, now I get my moderator is 22, which is not probably terribly interesting, but you get a sense for how you can use those variable values in combination with a particular focus group speaker. So if you want to grab individuals of a certain age, and you can use that really at different points in time. So you can use that at the beginning of your project to grab particular pieces, particular speakers' contributions that maybe are of interest to you, right? You want to start with a specific subset of your data. You can also do this at the end. So if I code my entire transcript, if I wanted to grab particular pieces and sort of do another loop of coding to decide, I've done this cursory coding where I have an idea of things and I want to look at a particular group first, you could use your variables there, or you can use them at the very end when you have all of your fine-grained coding done. And so if you want to do something like that, you'll be using the mixed methods. And so I'm going to open up the example project here. The reason I'm opening this is you have to have some coding done in order to make this work. You're not going to see anything in a visualization without it. So I can come over to my mixed methods. I can use this crosstab option, and note there's a specific option for crosstab for focus groups. So what you can, again, what you'll see here is the variables that are just associated with your focus group speakers. So if I do this just a regular crosstab, you'll see that my list of variables is much more extensive. And that's not a problem, but I'm interested in my focus group speakers, so I want to use that particular option. And so what I can do here, let's go ahead and do year of study. What do we have here? Let's remove this one. How about age? That's a good one. And we'll say age is larger than 24. And so this should return this will return 1 column for me in this case. So what this is going to show me here is I've got my codes on the left here, and I've actually specified everything. I think I want to pare that down a little bit. Let's go ahead and do just the work-life balance codes. And so we'll specify here only for activated codes. And so what this allows me to do, let's also do, we'll make sure that we activate just our focus group activated documents. And what this does is instead of seeing all the data in my project file, all the codes that I have in my code system, it's going to look at just my focus group and just the particular codes that I added. And now also just the variable value that I've specified. Okay, so if I create this, what I get is just a very straightforward matrix. The column is going to be my variable value that I've specified, and the rows will be my my codes that I have specified. So in the first window, what I get is a number. So I can see that individuals who are 24 years old, we coded them for education 6 times, free time 3 times, work-life separation once. This is kind of interesting, again, as sort of an exploratory piece. What I really like that's connected to this is the interactive quote matrix. And what this does is it actually displays the qualitative data. So it displays the text in this case that is associated with the code and the variable value that I've specified. Now, in this case, I only have 1 column, so it's not terribly interesting. Let's reset our parameters here so we get something interesting. Let's go ahead. We'll do age. I'm going to do this one, insert all variable values. So now I see I've got all these. Let's get rid of 0. And so now when I look at my interactive quote matrix, I get a side-by-side comparison. So I can see 22-year-olds, 24-year-olds, 27, 28. I can see when they talk about, what is it, education, is that the one we're looking at? When they talk about education, what's different across these different variable values. And again, you can stack these, so you could have age, level of education, number of children. You could stack this criteria. It's basically limitless in terms of how many variable values you want to include. This is a nice piece in order to be able to do some of the side-by-side analysis where you're trying to maybe draw some comparisons between how is a code applied based on the age value or something like that. That's a pretty simplistic description, but you kind of get the idea of how this works. Note that you can also export this stuff. So if you want to share this with colleagues that don't have MAXQDA, you can always get this out as a Word document or as an Excel document so that they have a way to view sort of any of this particular analysis that you have done. All right. So I think in terms of what I wanted to show today, that's about it. I know we're right at 30 minutes, and I want to make sure that we leave time for questions at the end here. Again, having the ability to, oh, there's one thing I did not show very clearly. That was the idea of having your focus group speakers in both places. So I've got them down here as my codes, and I've got them up here as my documents. And so you can kind of treat these as sub-documents. For example, if I wanted to see in my entire focus group all the contributions from Olga, I can go home, turn on my retrieve segments window, and I get all the coded segments that she provided in this case. I think I've got some extra data in here. Yes, I do. That's why. So I've activated my focus group and Olga. And so yes, 10 I should have because she has 10 contributions. So I can see that data. So I can analyze just her data. So you can treat the focus group in your documents as a whole. If I activate up here, I can also grab an individual speaker. So I could grab, for example, Fatima and Andy, and then I could see what did those two speakers, so I've got between them 23 total segments, what of those segments were about work-life balance. And I can see that there's 10 segments out of those two speaker contributions. So it allows you to either isolate a particular speaker or use a particular speaker's data to talk about the certain codes that were applied to those contributions. So there's some nice functionality in terms of how you can activate things there. The other application would be if you had participants across multiple focus groups, you could activate them as well. So you could see how are they coded in focus group 1 versus focus group 2. You could see some of those comparisons as well. That's not terribly common in terms of working with focus group data, but it is possible if you have it set up that way. All right, so I will stop here and I will pop over to the Q&A, see if there are any questions. I see a couple in the chat here. What was that last function called again, please? That is in the mixed methods. That is the crosstab. And the crosstab can be used specifically for focus groups, but it can also be used for any variable values that you have. So if I wanted to set this up in my data, let me run through that once more. Reset everything. If I did just a normal crosstab in this case, and I did, let's clear this out. I did my highest level. Let's clear this out again. I want to insert all of them. Highest level of education, you'll see that I get differing degrees of education for my participants. And I've got all these values here. And then let's go ahead and look at their work-life balance. And again, the initial table I get is here, which is just a distribution. So number of codes that were applied for a particular variable category. If I go over to the interactive quote matrix, I then can get the actual qualitative data that as it appears based off of those variable categories. You can also do, let's see, you can add in some stuff if you have comments on any of your coded segments, which is nice. That's something I like to include a lot. It includes your annotations as a researcher. This can be a super helpful tool to actually start to draw some comparisons between things of different variable values. Can the names be speaker 1 and speaker 2, or would names be better? I mean, functionally, yeah, you can name them anything that you want to name them. In terms of keeping things sort of organized, I think having actual names can be kind of easier to associate things, especially if you're going to be reading this data a lot, you know, several times at least. So having having a name attached to it could be helpful in order to, even if it is an anonymized name, right? It's a pseudonym or something like that. Can be helpful for maybe attaching some of those traits that come up as you do that reading. And that's coming from me personally, just in my head. That's how it would function. So, but yeah, functionally, you can name them anything you want. If you want to say speaker 1, speaker 2, speaker 3, give them some kind of code. Anything you want to do. If you need to anonymize, I understand that. That's a very common thing to need to keep that data straight, or anonymous. You go through the chat here. Oh, I missed what you at the beginning. I missed what you mentioned at the beginning about using colons. Could you repeat that, please? Yeah, of course. Let me grab the document. So in your focus group text, typically it's going to be just a docx or like a text file, rich text file, something like that. The key that MAXQDA is looking for is this colon right here. So whatever your name is, moderator, speaker, Fatima, Andy, whatever the name is, colon, and then it's looking for the line break and the next speaker. So that's how MAXQDA cues into identifying when the speaker change happens. So essentially, you just want to have your data set up in that format in order to make sure that you have the speaker changes. I should also note that if you import something like this, there is an option. Let's say you import, you did some coding, and you go, oh no, I didn't import it as a focus group transcript. It's okay. You can actually, in the import tab, there's an option here, convert text to focus group transcripts. And it's going to use that same classification where it's looking for a name, a colon, a line break to designate speaker changes. So don't worry if you jumped the gun and you did a little bit of coding, you're not screwed. You don't have to start over. You can convert it to a focus group transcript. So that can be kind of a helpful piece. I have seen folks use this stuff for things that are not purely focus groups as well. Basically, the utility there is having the ability to grab particular sections from your data. Obviously, it's designed for focus groups. That's how the tool was built. But of course, functions that are designed for one thing can often be implemented in other ways. Cool. Looks like that answered your question. Awesome. And let's see. Yeah, it looks like that's all the questions I've got in here so far. We've got a few minutes left. Feel free to pop any questions in here. If you don't have any questions about this topic and you have just general questions about MAXQDA, I'm happy to answer those as well. We've got like 7 minutes left of the session, so I want to make sure that everybody's getting something out of it today. So if you have other general questions, or maybe something about a project you're working on, or if you're trying to decide between one software or another, any questions that you want to drop into the chat. What are the best places on the document to make note for the speaker? Speaking over the speaker who doesn't speak on focus group FGD. Is that focus group transcripts? Oh, participants who are silent. Ooh, that's a good question. So the best place to note that, that's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that. I think one way that you could do it would be in document memos. So if I open up my focus group, I can stick basically any place in this text, and I don't know, it's not allowing me to do it here. For example, if I highlight this chunk, I could insert a memo here. So you could get close. So for example, on the particular paragraph, either before or after, you could include a in-document memo here that would be a notation of that. That would be one way to do it. There's also the opportunity to just include that as a notation. You know, this functions as a text editor, so you could actually make changes here as well. You could, I suppose, include that in your transcript as just maybe speaker brackets silent, some kind of notation, if it was particularly noteworthy in terms of that exchange in the conversation. I don't know how you would necessarily designate that over time because you're only going to have one person speaking at a time. An in-document memo would probably be the most straightforward, I guess, in terms of adding those notations in. When you have your sidebar on too, that memo text will appear over here. So those notations would be pretty clear if you wanted to notate, you know, particular sort of aspects of the conversation, I guess. I hope that sort of answers your question. Someone asked, should I use the same format for an individual interview? An individual interview, you'd want to use the transcript function. Transcripts function will have just the two. Will have just the two responses. So if you look at this, it will have it designated. I'll have line breaks for each response. Now you will not have the speaker change. So if you want that speaker change, you can do that. It's not terribly useful in an interview because you just have, aside from the moderator, aside from you conducting the interview, you just have the responses. So there's not as much utility there, but you could absolutely use it if you wanted to. You could certainly do it that way. Let me run back up here. Are there other types of visualizations you recommend for focus groups? Yeah, I mean, you can use all of the standard visualizations, you know, in the visual tools where you can get, once you've coded the whole document, you can look at, you know, code relations browser would probably be interesting. That's looking at the intersection of codes. So you have codes in your rows and codes in your columns and codes in your rows, and you look at how often, how frequently do they intersect and interact. Code map as well. If you have multiple focus groups where you are talking about the same interviews, these document comparisons might be interesting for you to look at comparing the two focus groups. Those could potentially be kind of helpful. I think this word trends might be kind of interesting as well. This is new to the newest version, and that shows. So this shows different words, the frequency of those words throughout the conversation. So you could use that to track different topics as they appear. That might be kind of an interesting one, especially as you're doing exploratory analysis. If you're just starting out and you're not sure what topics to code for or what things to investigate, you could use that to do some keyword analysis. Not to say that that's like the way to do it, but it's a way to start to help you kind of get an idea of where things are going. In my MAXQDA, I cannot get link to function. Please advise. Max maps. Oh, this piece where you're linking things together. That I'm not quite sure. You might want to actually email functional support about that, because if there's a bug or something, they would do some actual testing. It probably wouldn't be best for me to do that on the fly here. Yeah, I would email functional support if you're having a bug there. That does happen occasionally. A couple minutes left here. I noticed that some of those coding brackets have a hollow dot, whereas others are solid. What's the difference? Ooh, great question. So that is one of my very favorite features in MAXQDA, and that is a code comment. And so this is typically you include keywords, annotations, and what I like is complete sentences. And then that appears here in your sidebar. And this annotation is attached on the level of the coded segment. So anytime I export that, my comment comes with. If I look at my interactive quote matrix that I showed earlier with the columns and all the different text, my comments are included. Comments are an excellent way as you're building a code system to start to define it. So you include sort of references for why you applied the code, what was unique about this application, what keywords, all those kinds of fun things. And it really just, it's that systematic process where you're avoiding leaps. And so you have these little tiny bits of annotation that are all sort of lining up to give you a broader code definition, right? So that's a really, really great piece. Probably one of my very most used aspects in MAXQDA. I'm a really big into code comments. We're right at time here. I got one question left. Let's see if I can answer it. This is a fascinating reflection. What might be a fast way to produce a short report on a long focus group transcripts? Can QTT use for this? Yes, Ray, great question. QTT would be a great way to do that. So in the analysis tab, questions, themes, and theories, this is a window where you would specify your, this is functional. So this just tells you where you're sending stuff like visualizations and things, your subject and your research question, and then you would add in all of the relevant elements. So what codes are related to just to this research question, not in your whole project, just to this research question. You know, what are the important segments, any visualizations that you create here, and it gives you space to actually comment on these. And so when you export this, and let's just go take a look at what this looks like. It's on my desktop. When you export this, if you click yes here, it gives you a nice clean report, your subject, your research question, and everything is hyperlinked up here in the table of contents so I can see my visuals. And the best part is all the commentary I've created for my visualizations is included. QTT is great. Whether you're starting in the middle of your project at the end, it's a great place to collect ideas, to build out your research question, to give updates if you're doing, you know, a thesis and you have to give updates to an advisor, all that different stuff. So that's a really, really great resource. I do some webinars on that. Check that out. If you have questions, you can also email me. My contact info is in the handout. Love to hear from folks. So I think we are up against it here for time, unfortunately. These are some great questions coming in at the end. If your question did not get answered, please reach out after the session. You drop me an email. Be happy to answer those. Love to hear from folks after these sessions. It's always great to chat about the work that you're doing and things with MAXQDA. So enjoy the rest of Max Days. Hopefully see you again tomorrow in a couple more sessions. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. So have a great rest of your day, everyone.